good afternoon from MML. Welcome to all the municipal leaders. Happy Friday and happy last day of April 2021. Welcome to MML's continuing Town Hall Newsmaker series. I'm Scott Hancock, and I'm honored to be your facilitator for this town hall today. So taking you back a couple of weeks ago at midnight on April 12th, those of us who follow the Maryland General Assembly closely witnessed the conclusion of the 442nd session of the Maryland General Assembly. And to say the entire session was unique would certainly be an understatement. As municipal leaders have experienced in your own community operations, COVID-19 forced numerous changes to the logistics of the legislature, including separating the House members into 2 meeting chambers to achieve social distancing and closing the doors of the State House to those not directly associated with the legislative function, much to our chagrin, but all health precautions and well warranted. But I will tell you, from my perspective, it was a weird session. Our guest today had a front row seat to the House session as the Speaker pro tempore for the Maryland House of Delegates. The Honorable Sheree Sample-Hughes was very much in the forefront of the unique session, and she's going to provide an end of session report from her very unique perspective. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, we're very much looking forward to hearing from you. But before we do have a few logistical notes, because you always have housekeeping, and we want to make sure that we mention those. We are exclusively using the Q&A feature on this Zoom platform for questions and or comments for our guests. We ask that you please enter your questions in the Q&A that's found at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you all know that by now. And then following our guest opening comments, we will share as many of your questions as time permits. But if we are unable to get to your questions during this town hall, we are going to be sure to share the remaining questions with the delegate staff so she can reply directly to you following today's program. And secondly, please keep your questions brief. Please keep them nonpartisan and to the point. We thank you in advance for your cooperation. So, by way of brief introduction to our friend, Delegate Sheree Sample-Hughes represents District 37A, which is portions of Wicomico and Dorchester counties on Maryland's beautiful Eastern Shore. She was chosen by Speaker Adrian Jones to serve as the Speaker pro tempore for the Maryland House of Delegates, and is the first African-American woman from the Eastern Shore to hold that position. Delegate Sample-Hughes serves on both the Rules and Executive Nominations Committee and is on the Health and Government Operations Committee. She's the chair of the Opioid Work Group and is a member of both the Police Reform and Accountability Work Group and the Emergency COVID-19 Work Group, leading our state through this horrible pandemic crisis that we've been facing for the last year. Prior to her election to the House of Delegates, you might be interested to know the Speaker Pro Tem was a member of the Wicomico County Council. So what I'm saying is she gets local government and she values the partnership between the state and our local governments. She's a graduate of Delaware State University, bachelor's in public relations, but she also holds a master's in management from Wilmington University. Most importantly, she's married and the proud mother of 2 sons. And as her bio indicates, she truly lives what she speaks and means it when she says, yours in service. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, welcome to MML's Town Hall. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Scott. And it certainly is a pleasure to be with you all on today. It is a beautiful day. I was just outside celebrating the University of Maryland Eastern Shore's construction of their pharmacy building. That particular building is long overdue, and it is an honor to be able to say that I, as well as all of our leadership in the House and in the Senate, had a hand in its completion. So I just, really still on that high, if you will, of seeing the building being completed and knowing that our pharmacy students and health professionals will have a place to be able to get their education and be in a space of what the real world looks like, of interactive and engaging of these disciplinaries together. So with that being said, as it's been a busy afternoon, but I am very pleased to be with you on today. It wasn't noted, but I will say this, I love local government. As a matter of fact, my first job out of college was in local government. It was at Pocomoke City Hall, where I was the project manager and the Section 8 administrator. What I have learned since then is if you have a job that has 2 titles, you must know that you're going to be overworked. But I would just say that I was certainly grateful for the experience to work in City Hall and to be with the people and know what their concerns are and what things we needed to do in the administrative side of City Hall to improve their lives, whether it's through wastewater treatment plants, whether it was program open space fundings that we're trying to secure, or simply housing for the low income areas in the city. So the passion for local government started early on, and it still is there, and it still is today with you. I bring you greetings from the House of Delegates, letting you know that our Speaker Adrian Jones, had a robust agenda for this legislative session, and all of us in leadership, we knew that it was going to be a tall order, but we knew that we had the tools in place to have a successful session. Yes, this session was quite different. And the first time in history, we had 2 separate chambers. As Scott mentioned, the separate chambers was one of them that I was running, basically. And so with that being said, it presiding over that chamber, it presented some undue or things that needed to be addressed a little bit more so with technology. But I must say, we were able to ensure that all of our members were safe, able to ensure that we did not have an outbreak and dealing with COVID-19, because our members and their families are our priority before we even were to look at legislation. And with that being said, we were able to get all of the members of the House and the Senate vaccinated, those who wanted it. And we knew that it was important to have those things underway before we got into a full-fledged session and really making sure we were getting the work done. So I'm grateful that we were able to walk away and ensure that our members were safe and healthy at the end of our 90 days. Some legislatures around the nation had to stop. They weren't able to continue their business and, trying to make sure their members were safe. But unfortunately, some things happened. But in this particular session, it did allow us to learn about things that we might want to continue and things that we honestly missed from having day-to-day contact with the public, hands-on, if you will. But it was a learning experience, and it's one that we can continue to work through our next session. So this particular session, when we walked in, we knew that the agenda was full. And I say that from the perspective that we knew that we had governor overrides that we wanted to take underway. We knew that we had legislation that needed to get through to help our families, the business community, and so many others be able to walk away and know that the legislators had their best interests. And so we looked at one in particular I would like to highlight is that when we had the Relief Act, that was a bipartisan effort that everyone wanted to ensure that the resources and the federal funds that were coming down would be able to get back into our communities, would be able to be at the city level and the county level, and making sure that all persons were able to have access to the PPEs and actually have funding to continue their work in their communities. And so that was very much area where we all came together and knew that it was something that needed to be passed. So that was emergency legislation. What I will share with you is that our HBCUs, our historically Black colleges and universities, was and still is a priority. Case in point, I just left one a few moments ago. But the goal was to have our HBCUs to be able to have programming, to have scholarships available, and reduce the duplication of programming in the state of Maryland. But making sure that this particular piece of legislation that would go through would provide $577 million to the institutions in our state so they could provide unique programming. One particular school, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, wanted to further their efforts to possibly bring on a veterinarian school. That is a need. It's a need in the state where young people want to go into that profession. They shouldn't have to go to Virginia, but they could come to a school in the state that is very much in tune to provide those resources. So with the $577 million, it's broken down by each school and how much they would get, but it's a way to ensure that they would have equitable funding and resources and be able to continue their mission. And that was the speaker's bill. That was House Bill number 1. Throughout this session, we looked at different ways to ensure that the community would be able to access their health professionals. We knew it was imperative to continue this. The governor had made it an executive order to allow telehealth to be a priority, to be a tool for citizens to engage with their physicians and to be able to do it safely. But what we wanted to do as a legislature was to ensure that we could preserve that. And preserving that means that we could be able to continue it beyond the governor's executive order. And that was House Bill 123. And this in of itself was important, and it was a tall project, tall order, but it was one that was necessary. And so we worked together with the Maryland Healthcare Commission and all of the entities that needed to work with us, insurance companies, et cetera, to ensure that our citizens in the state of Maryland could continue to get quality healthcare through telehealth. With that being said, we found out, and we all know, that the opportunity and the access to broadband is not equal throughout the state of Maryland. We learned that particularly in the fact that all of our schools were trying to, make sure they connect with the children and had those resources available. But when that came to needing to happen, we certainly felt it even more so that the communities of Western Maryland, Eastern Shore, Southern Maryland, and even in our urban areas in the state were lacking. So with this particular known issue, we were able to put additional funding into broadband on top of what has been coming down through the federal government. So our goal to ensure that broadband is still a priority so we can get all of our communities online by, I think the goal is 2025, and make sure that it is reality. That's important. It's important for our education community. It's important for our healthcare community, as well as individuals who desire to be able to continue to work from home. And that bill in particular that's dealing with working from home is telework assistance and business technology, which is House Bill 73. This would provide grants to communities, to businesses, and to government agencies that desire to provide this telework option. And that would mean that they would possibly maybe need infrastructure. They would need some types of equipment in order to be able to set up and provide the level of service that that entity provides. So I'm very pleased with that. I'm very pleased and grateful that this is something that we're all looking at as an entire state and trying to put in our 2 cents, if you will, to make sure it becomes a reality in all of our parts of the state. As I continue to give you a highlight, I wanted to share with you that we prepared for legislation much sooner than stepping into the doors or going through the doors of the Maryland General Assembly in January. With that being said, we had a work group that dealt with police reform, and I was a part of that work group, and we started our work early on at the at the role of making sure that we had people that were in those positions to be at the table, and making sure we had geographic diversity, making sure that we could have a group that looked at police reform that reflected the communities in which we serve. And with that being said, we left that committee, or that work group, I should say, with 12 recommendations. And those recommendations range from use of force, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, to scholarships for persons who want to go into law enforcement. And when we provided our report and recommendations to the Speaker of the House, that was then put into the form of legislation and vetted even more so by the Judiciary Committee in the House. And what we have been able to walk away with in this particularly House Bill 670 is walk away with a product that is improving law enforcement throughout the state of Maryland, where it becomes a unified approach to know that if I'm in Carroll County or Worcester County or St. Mary's County, that I know as a citizen that there are efforts and there are ways that have been put in place to ensure my safety as well as the officers. The uniformity in traffic stops is important. We heard that from the citizens when we did our town hall and tried to find out what the concerns and issues were. And traffic stops is one of them. And so this piece of legislation speaks to the fact that the officer is supposed to provide identification of themselves and the reason for the stop. What also is in that piece of legislation is shares that the citizen, if they're being stopped, that they are able to record the stop with their cell phone. And we raise that because we've seen throughout the nation that we get to see and how that actually provides accountability for the individual as well as the officer of what has occurred in that particular stop. We also looked at the cameras that are currently being used, but they're not all available in all jurisdictions of the state of Maryland. So we put in the legislation that all body armed cameras should be by 2025 in each jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. In addition to that, education is a priority within the police reform as well. The educational assistance that is highlighted in this bill speaks to the fact that we, again, want citizens that go into law enforcement to look like us, to look like the community in which they serve. And to be able to do that, we have to ensure that there are funds available to help them in their college years and to get them to the next level. In addition to providing technical training and any additional training that current officers would like to have. And so there's about $8.5 million that is put into that category for the educational assistance. And this is a new program, and I'm looking forward to its success and looking for everyone to realize that we are making police accountability and education a priority in the state of Maryland. The last thing I'll highlight on the police reform legislation, it speaks again to accountability. We'll now have police accountability boards in each jurisdiction, as well as trial boards, and of course the administrative board as well. But the police accountability board is an opportunity for citizens to be chosen to have a voice in the policing process. Each jurisdiction is responsible for appointing persons that want to serve and the number of them, as well as who they wish to have on the police accountability board. Whereas the trial board is a little bit more prescriptive in that bill, and it speaks to ensuring that we may have a retired or a sitting judge, a retired or police officer who's currently on the force, as well as a citizen. So that's a little bit more prescriptive, and if I have misspoken on that exact title, then I will I'll rephrase that. But I wanted to share with you that the legislation does speak to numerous things that we could see the benefits of it in long terms. I currently and still have the responsibility in looking at legislation on the health side. I serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee, have been since I have been a member of the legislature. And in that same avenue, around that same perspective, there are many pieces of health legislation that we put forth, and some personally that I sponsored myself. I am very pleased to say that one of the issue areas that we have in the state of Maryland deals with maternal health. Too often we are seeing high numbers of women dying from childbirth and not accessing prenatal care that they need. So there is a program that we have in the state of Maryland. It's called the Maryland Prenatal and Infant Care Grant Program, but it needed additional resources so we can get the revenue and the resources throughout the entire state of Maryland. So House Bill 1349 was one that I sponsored, and in this particular legislation, it increases the budget from $100,000 to $1.1 million in fiscal year 2023, and then $2.1 million beyond in fiscal 2024. This will really, really help the hospitals in the state of Maryland and the institutions that are qualifying to be able to provide these services, providing access to the women and children so they can continue to have healthy outcomes. We also know that there are disparities in the healthcare community by way of making a bill to speak to that. House Bill 28 speaks to the implicit biases training that will be required of all medical professionals in the state of Maryland. Too often we see the disparities and see that individuals may need to have implicit bias trainings because there are unfortunately negative things that happen in the healthcare community. And this is one step towards that effort. When we have all been dealt the hand of the COVID-19 issue, virus, problem, whatever you want to call it, we knew that it wasn't just the virus itself that was going to impact people. We also knew that it was going to affect their mental health. There was a piece of legislation that I certainly was honored and thankful that I was able to vote on, was House Bill 812. That is the Maryland Mental Services Phone Call Program. It requires the Maryland Department of Health to make recommendations to the 211 system about providing an opt-in mental health services phone call program that would allow persons to have that access to mental health services, to get a phone call and be checked on and see what their state is and what they may be in need of. They also have the opportunity to through this program to be able to be connected to the resources. And this particular piece of legislation is named after the son of Jamie Raxton, our congressman in the state. And it is now the Thomas Bloom Raxton Act. So we want everyone to understand that we have heard people loud and clear about the concerns and where they want the citizens of Maryland want to move the needle on certain issue areas, whether it is the health community, the policing community, or even the aspect of making certain that revenue is continually come in so we can provide education services. One bill that we did sponsor and actually overrode the veto was House Bill 932 that speaks to the digital sales tax. This was a bill that was presented prior to the pandemic, and we knew that this was an avenue to level the playing field as it relates to bringing in revenue to the tune of $150 million that would then go to our education efforts with Kerwin. But the way to level the playing field was to ensure that if you are paying taxes on CDs that you get from Best Buy or any other place where it sells CDs, you're paying taxes. But if you download that same app and that music, you're not paying the taxes. And that is where our brick and mortar, we wanted to make sure our brick and mortar stores was not just paying and carrying the weight of that particular tax, that it's also required by online users as well. while there certainly has been, controversy over that, the goal is to ensure that we modernize our taxing structure and we utilize the revenue from it to provide funding for our education community. The area in which I will probably end with and then entertain questions is the fact that we brought up legislation forward that deals with voter ID requirements. And so in the state of Maryland, we are still wanting to make sure there's no barriers towards voting and wanting to ensure that there's access to voting, allowing people to no longer have to sign that they want to get their absentee ballot every year. This would allow us to provide the ballot ongoing and allow people to have access to voting. And so with that being said, we had heavy debates on the floor about it, but we were able to move to the point of ensuring that access to voting, whether it be physical barriers or whether it be the fight against trying to require people to show their IDs. Studies have shown over the years that a population of 65 and older traditionally don't have their IDs, or they may be outdated. And some persons may be in assisted living facilities or the nursing home and can't get out and get current IDs. So the Maryland legislature wanted to ensure that that continues to be an area of providing access and providing opportunities for all to be able to vote in their respective districts. What I will do now is go ahead and take questions. Certainly we have covered a lot in this legislative season, and there's a lot more to certainly share with you that we've done. We had about 2,000 bills this year. Usually we have about 3,000. So that was a step down of 1,000, but we certainly had a lot that did occur. And that we have been able to work on, inclusive of sports betting. That is new. And citizens of Maryland voiced the mere fact that they wanted to have sports betting in the state of Maryland, so we weren't losing the revenue of going to Delaware or DC for that matter, but to be able to bring that revenue and keep it in the state of Maryland. So with that being said, thank you for your time, and it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Madam Speaker Pro Tem, thank you. We're going to give you a break. Sounds like you had a lot of speeches today. You've had a very, very busy day. Just want to, first of all, thank you for your very comprehensive report. Very, very helpful to our members. And to remind everybody on the call today that we are taking questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any particular questions you'd like to ask of the Speaker Pro Tem, I'm sure she would love to answer them. And if we aren't able to get to all of them, again, we will certainly get them to her staff. I'm sure Trap will be right on top of it and get back with the answers as soon as possible. First question that's been raised, Delegate, is, well, first of all, a lot of comments about your excellent work on racial equity and justice and police reform. Kudos, kudos, kudos. The question is, how does the new legislation civilian oversight component work for municipal police departments? Would there be a statewide, or is it a county-wide oversight board covering municipal departments, or would each municipality have to set up their own?
Sure, thank you for the question. The way I have been educated on and spoken to the Vice Chair of Judiciary is that each entity would have their own. And the council members would be the ones to appoint individuals to these particular boards. So that puts the decision making in the hands of our local elected officials. As I said earlier, the trial board is the one that's very prescriptive on what that should look like. But the police accountability board is one that there is flexibility for the jurisdictions. And so I think that's the important piece, that we know the need is great, and we know the need to have the voice of the community and civilian community. we have to allow our local elected officials to make those decisions as well. But we set the framework, I should say, but you have to make the decisions yourself.
Thank you. That's very helpful. On the same general topic, the MML Board of Directors has been very, very proactive in recognizing the important opportunity to carry forward the moral obligation to better serve our municipalities and to bend that long arc that's been talked about toward justice, whether it's the police, whether it's, as you said earlier, disparities in health, education, housing, employment, or evaluating our policies and programs through an equity lens. Do you have any advice for municipal leaders or for MML as an association on how we can educate and facilitate important conversations along these lines?
Yes, I think, as I said, coming from local government, that we must have those conversations. We have to ensure that the very people who are asking for particular services or particular needs in the community, that things should look differently, we have to carry it all the way down to our local entities, to our municipalities. So I would, continue to ensure that you have those conversations locally. You may even take time on some of your council meetings and say, hey, this is new, this is what's happening, because that's the piece that becomes imperative for things to really go and but to really come to its fruition and happen. I recall when we were talking about the police reforming legislation early on in our work group, we already had some pieces in place, but our locals were not aware of some things in oversight that could have happened. And so that goes back to, we had to strengthen our Maryland Policing and Training Commission to make the locals aware. And I made a recommendation that when we make various policies and make these recommendations and they come to fruition, that we have to engage with our local elected officials so they'll know how to implement or find out that they may not be working. That's a back and forth conversation, I believe, that needs to happen, because otherwise we're defeating the purpose of making real change. So I certainly welcome it. I think maybe, again, it could be something done on a quarterly basis or every month at meetings to just share some things that are new and some things that came out of the legislative session. Case in point, the one thing I think is important is that this is a time right now where a lot of people are finding themselves wanting to become homeowners, or finding the market right now is in a better place for buying a home. Well, with that being said, we passed legislation on a savings account for first-time home buyers, a savings account. That was House Bill 1178. And that information could move someone to a step closer towards home ownership and continue to stay in their very community if they want to. So, the information is powerful, and I just want to continue to be able to get it out.
Well, and as I said earlier when I introduced you, you get it. You understand the importance of the partnership between the state and the local governments. So, the conversation works both ways, and it's not just necessarily making sure that what the legislature did this year or any year is passed on to the locals, but that the locals can give you feedback, because that's really helpful in maintaining that good line of communication and help you, I think, in the long run, pass some meaningful legislation that actually works.
Yes.
So we appreciate that. I want to switch gears just for a minute and talk about unemployment a little bit. In your final wrap up to your constituents, you talked about unemployment insurance and some of the changes that were made. Could you talk a little bit more about that, and either legislation or some of the concerns you have going forward for the unemployed?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I don't know how I didn't even think about it at the moment, because the reality is 75% or more, and my chief of staff is on this call today, so he'll probably more, but 75% of our emails and phone calls right now are all citizens needing help with unemployment. I've even dedicated one particular staff person to strictly do that. And the frustrating piece is that she's not an employee of unemployment. So she's like trying to, help citizens based on what limited information that she has, and tries to get that information to the unemployment division to help citizens. But I'll be honest with you, we have had numerous calls and people, in dire straits of needing services. And I certainly, feel sad because people sometimes are at their very last rope, and so to that end, we know that the system needs some modernization. With that being said, we knew it was important for our Economics Matters Committee to look at the unemployment issues and really see how we could study the system, make reforms, and then make those recommendations. We also knew that this system that was underway changed in the middle of the pandemic, and so that made it even more difficult for citizens to get their assistance. We also have in House Bill 908 deals with the employer contribution and reimbursement payments. This particular bill provides a little flexibility for employers to pay their unemployment taxes. Because what I just heard on the other day is that they're very much, struggling and wanting to be in compliance, but they are also taxed literally with the burden of trying to keep up and pay all of those at one given time. So this particular legislation allows them to pay incrementally over time instead of paying one lump sum. And so that would help the businesses and also help the citizens that are in need of the information and the unemployment insurance as well. We have looked at this issue back and forth, and so there's numerous pieces of legislation on it, and we want to ensure that we are serving our citizens to the best of our ability through the pieces of legislation by modernizing the system, improving customer service, and creating more accountability.
Thank you so much for that. One of the things that came up in our conversation today with the governor's office, because we have weekly telephone calls with the governor's staff, talking about, particularly since COVID hit, talking about the different departments of the state and how they're dealing with COVID. The Secretary of Labor, Tiffany Robinson, was talking about fraud. There was apparently a very serious fraud problem where people have actually had their identities stolen. And that people are filing unemployment benefits, which is requiring a lot of people to do a lot of research in the Department of Labor to make sure that the people that are getting the money are truly the people that have filed and need the money. Any conversations in the legislature about that?
Well, that's part of the reform package that we wanted to be putting forth, and the studying it as well. That's House Bill 907. So yes, we've heard about fraud, and I've had some constituents come to me and share that they, this one lady in particular, she's retired, but she got a letter from the unemployment office saying that her unemployment is being filed and she should hear something soon from them. But the lady was very much saying that she has not filed for anything. She's been retired for years. And so, that was quite concerning because she's concerned about any of her personal information being given out or anything of that nature. But it's certainly a concern. It's certainly something that has to be addressed. And I know the administration is trying to do their best to do that. But then I look again at the flip side. We've got people who are, not able to maintain their home. I have a couple ladies call me, tell me they're sleeping in their cars. They've lost their houses. So, it's real. It's real. And, whatever we can do on all fronts, the executive branch, the legislative branch, any of us can do, it's worth it. It's worth fighting for.
I have to ask you, you mentioned earlier that you were in charge of maintaining order in the annex during session, and one of the two chambers where the House of Delegates was meeting. sort of like to figure out how that was for you. And we'd also be interested, I think, in hearing what you think about the 2021 session may carry forward to the 2022 session. What things were really good about the way we had to do things that we may want to replicate for next year?
Sure. And I'm glad you said that, because there were good things that I think that we were able to do, and I think that we possibly can continue. While we did not have physical one-on-one seeing people in the offices and in our committee rooms, but I must say that with the ability to have Zoom for our subcommittee meetings, as well as the regular committee this year, but I believe what we can continue in our subcommittee meetings is to have Zoom. And I say that because as a resident of the Eastern Shore, I don't mind taking the drive to Annapolis, as you know, but there's so many other people who can't, and they want to have their voice heard. And in my particular committee, I actually saw more Eastern Shore individual or citizens participate in the conversations that we had in our subcommittee meetings, and be able to connect with us as legislators extremely, in a good manner, because they were able to connect with us as soon as we got off that Zoom, then jump on another Zoom. But I think that was and is a good opportunity for us to still have the engagement and have citizens aware of what we are doing and what it looks like, truly. And the other area that I think that is possibly beneficial to continue is the ability to have all the testimony and the information up on the system 2 days in advance, so you can have time to digest it as a citizen if you're wanting to testify on a bill, and or again, if you're a legislator, you can digest it in advance as well. So there's some parts of it I think were very beneficial, and streamlining some of the programs, or streamlining some of the things that I don't think that we will always have to have, so people can stay focused on the agenda and not doing other things. And I'll leave that as that. And then your last question with regards to the annex, it was quite different. All of our members were sitting at desks, and we had plexiglass around everybody. And then we had what we call as the phone booth was a structure in the middle of the room where the delegates would be able to go in, ask questions, amendments on the bill, participating in that manner. And so that was different, but, we were able to get through it. And what was also interesting at the very beginning, some of the members were a little frustrated because they felt as though they weren't being heard or weren't getting their voice through when it was time for them, or they desired to stand up on a piece of legislation. So what we did do, the IT people gave me access to see whenever someone pressed their button, because they would press their button on an iPad, and then their name will come up on my screen as well. And then I had a state trooper there with me, and I gave him the information as well. So he called over to the main chamber just to double check that they're looking at the same thing that we're looking at on our iPads. And once we were able to get that in place, I believe that things were a lot more smoother. And I just asked for their patience. I said, we're all doing something new. I had no clue what we were doing. We made it happen. It was quite new, but everybody worked hard, all of the staff of the General Assembly.
Oh, there's no question, and kudos to Alex and the staff over in the Senate as well. It was major work and a lot of pivoting going on during the 2021 session. We know you've got to get together for redistricting. And before I ask this question, because I want to make sure we're running out of time with the Speaker Pro Tem, so if you have any last minute questions you'd like to ask her, or any comments to make, please post them in the Q&A. Now, redistricting. We know you're coming together again sometime in the interim for redistricting, since the census was delayed. Anything else that you think the legislature may be working on in special session during the coming session or coming interim?
Well, given the fact that we're just at the end of April and all of us are still trying to catch our breath from the 90-day session that was quite, as you know, unique, but certainly did not let up on the work. It was extra. I'm going to say at this point, no, we know that the redistricting is a priority. We know that the fact that the federal government, you know, with the numerous delays and trying to make sure they got as much information on the census as they could, that's going to delay our process a little bit. So I'm looking possibly for like December or January for us to reconvene, have that conversation, but most importantly, have the citizens aware of what is being proposed and having a voice, their voice, a part of the process. So we look to have a robust conversation, just like I know the governor will through his commission. And so those areas are important, and that's what we're gonna look to do. And then I believe it's gonna go through our rules committee, and then we'll be able to have the entire General Assembly weigh in.
Okay, we have I think a really, really good question here that I want to share with you, and hopefully we'll getting close to wrapping up. So how might the influx of the federal funding that's coming through the ARP we had in the CARES Act, et cetera, how might that affect, in your opinion, the legislature's approach for funding for the next couple of years?
Well, I think it's going to have a huge impact. And I say that because we were able to do some things in the session this year that we may not have been able to do without the federal support, which allowed us to look to funding more capital projects and allowed us to put more in our healthcare community efforts. And so the funding is extremely important. As a matter of fact, I was very pleased to see on your website how you have the American Recovery Plan. It is very specific for the funding that's going to come down to the county and breaking it down how it's going to come down to the municipalities. And I think that's important because it puts it more in perspective for all of us as to what we're working with and what the priorities will be. And that makes it very transparent in what we're going to possibly see for years to come. So the funds are extremely important. And so I can envision us as a state continue to lead the fight of what the priorities are and utilizing the federal funds to the best of our ability and seeing the long-term benefits. That American Recovery Plan it speaks to making sure our low-income individuals are becoming whole. It's making sure that health is provided, education is provided, and then going all the way into our infrastructure, as we know, is always going to need supports. So again, I really appreciate that breakdown on your website, and I would certainly encourage anyone from the municipality, dig into that information, make sure it's going to where you believe it needs to go to in your jurisdiction. And likewise, you know, we'll certainly do the same at the state level.
Yeah, thank you for the shout out on our folks spend a lot of time trying to gather that information to put on our website. And there's just, as you know, so much that we don't know yet about what the money can be spent for. We're, as we were mentioning before you hopped on the call today, we're waiting for guidance from Treasury. You know, we've heard that over and over and over again as to what the municipal money can actually be spent for. We know the broad categories, but there's so many subcategories within that. One of the things that we don't think we can spend it for is the types of projects that we use highway user revenue for. And you know that is very, very important to municipal governments across the state. And we hope that we can, as my mother used to say, and you know this saying because you're from the shore, put a bug in your ear that if there are additional funds coming to the state and the state could share some funds with the municipalities and maybe fully fund highway user revenue, we would appreciate that consideration going forward.
Thank you. Thank you for putting that bug in my ear. But look, at the same time, I remember when we had to do so many things to our, I was at the county level then, but anyway, our county government is up side down, if you will, when we had to make the decision to let some people go in the roads department. That was heartbreaking. And the impact has certainly been there all throughout these years. But certainly, as you have noted, that if there is something that we can do to restore that fully, then all means, I would support that.
Thank you very much. And I know your seatmate, Delegate Anderson, is probably, mentioning that to you over and over and over again. As a former
Yes,
mayor, he gets it as well. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, we have really enjoyed talking with you today. You've been so informative and so helpful. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership. We hope that we are going to see you in person in Ocean City at the end of June, right in almost your backyard.
I love it.
In Ocean City. Again, thank you. Thank you to our special guest, the Honorable Sheree Sample-Hughes, Speaker Pro Tem for the Maryland House of Delegates. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for our town hall. Wish everybody a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, wear your mask, get your vaccine if you haven't already gotten it, and please take care of your neighbors, everyone. Have a great weekend.